The church smelled like polished wood and white lilies, the kind Daniel used to bring home every anniversary. Back then, their scent meant celebration. Today, it felt suffocating. I sat in the front row, my hands folded so tightly in my lap that my knuckles had gone pale. The casket stood just a few feet away, surrounded by flowers that people had sent. Too many flowers for a man who had always preferred simplicity. 52 years. 52 years of mornings together, of quiet routines, of knowing someone so deeply that silence between you felt like a language of its own. And now nothing. Clara, are you okay? I turned slightly. My daughter, Sophie, sat beside me, her eyes swollen from crying. She had always worn her emotions openly, unlike me. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if it was true. I'm fine, I whispered, even though the word felt hollow. The truth was, I didn't know what I was anymore without Daniel. People filled the pews behind us. Neighbors, old colleagues, distant relatives. Some faces I hadn't seen in years. They approached one by one earlier, offering condolences, sharing memories I barely remembered. Daniel had always been the social one. I had been the background. That thought stung more than I expected. Then I saw him. Ethan. My son stood near the back of the church, his posture stiff, his expression unreadable. For a moment, my heart lifted. He looked so much like Daniel it almost hurt. But then I saw her beside him. Vanessa. Even dressed in black, she managed to look like she was attending a high-end event rather than a funeral. Her posture was perfect, her expression carefully composed. Not a tear in sight. They hadn't visited Daniel in the hospital. Not once. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to look away. Don't go to them, Sophie murmured under her breath, following my gaze. I wasn't going to, I replied, though a part of me had considered it. The service began shortly after. The pastor spoke warmly about Daniel, his generosity, his work ethic, his devotion to family. I listened, but it all felt distant, like someone else's life being described. My mind drifted instead. To our first apartment, tiny and drafty, where we used blankets to block the winter wind. To the night Ethan was born, when Daniel cried harder than I did. To the evenings on the porch, when we'd sit side by side, saying nothing, watching the sun disappear. That had been our life. Simple, steady, real. When Sophie stood to speak, her voice trembled but held strong. She told stories about her father teaching her how to ride a bike, about how he stayed up all night helping her prepare for exams, about how he never missed a single important moment in her life. I felt pride and pain all at once. Then the pastor looked toward Ethan. Would you like to say a few words? Ethan hesitated. Vanessa leaned toward him, whispering something I couldn't hear. He shook his head. No, he said quietly. Something inside me cracked. When my turn came, my legs felt heavier than they ever had before. I walked slowly to the podium, gripping its edges as if it were the only thing keeping me upright. I looked out at the room. So many people. And yet, I had never felt more alone. Daniel, I began, but my voice faltered. I took a breath, trying again. Daniel was my entire world. The words came slowly at first, but then they found their rhythm. I spoke about our life together, about the way he made ordinary days feel meaningful, about how he had been my partner in everything. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't stop them. He deserved that. He was kind, I said softly. Stronger than anyone I've ever known. And, even at the end, he thought more about us than himself. I paused, steadying myself. I don't know how to imagine life without him, I admitted. But I do know that loving him was the greatest gift I've ever been given. The room was silent. For a moment, it felt like I had honored him properly. Then I heard it. A voice. Sharp. Cutting. Those tears look very convincing. The words sliced through the air. I froze.
Vanessa.
She hadn't even bothered to whisper properly. I mean, she continued, louder this time, everyone knows they barely lived like a real couple these last years. A ripple of shock moved through the room.
My heart slammed against my chest.
I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. It felt like the ground beneath me had disappeared. Excuse me? Sophie snapped, half rising from her seat. But I didn't look at her. I looked at Ethan. My son. He sat there rigid, silent. He didn't defend me. He didn't deny it.
He just looked down.
And in that moment, something inside me broke in a way that grief alone had not managed to do. I returned to my seat somehow, though I couldn't remember walking. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I sat down. The whispers started almost immediately. Some people looked at Vanessa in disbelief. Others looked at me with pity. I stared straight ahead, refusing to let anyone see just how deeply her words had cut. 52 years of love, reduced to a lie in a single sentence. The rest of the service passed in a blur. I heard nothing, saw nothing. I existed only in fragments, holding myself together by sheer will. When it ended, people began filing out. Vanessa walked ahead confidently, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just humiliated me in front of everyone who mattered. Ethan followed her.
Of course he did.
I stood slowly, my body heavy, my mind numb. But beneath the grief, beneath the humiliation, something else stirred. Because I knew something they didn't. Daniel had planned everything carefully, and the next part was about to begin. The will. The drive to the attorney's office felt longer than it actually was, even though it was only across town. I sat in the back seat beside Sophie, watching the familiar streets pass by as if they belonged to someone else's life. The city looked the same. People crossing roads, cafes open, cars honking. But for me, everything had shifted in a way that could never be undone. Daniel was gone, and yet, somehow, I felt him more strongly now than I had even during his last days. It was as if something unfinished lingered in the air, waiting. Sophie held my hand tightly the entire way. She hadn't let go since we left the church, as if she feared I might disappear too if she did. I appreciated it more than I could say. In the front seat, Ethan and Vanessa sat in silence. Or rather, Ethan sat in silence. Vanessa was tapping her fingers against her phone, occasionally sighing in irritation, as though this entire situation was nothing more than an inconvenience to her schedule. I don't understand why this couldn't wait, she muttered at one point, not bothering to lower her voice. Reading a will the same day as the funeral is excessive. It was your father's wish, Sophie snapped before I could respond. Vanessa gave a small, tight smile. Of course it was. I said nothing. I had learned long ago that engaging with her rarely led anywhere good. But inside, something cold had begun to settle in my chest. The grief was still there, overwhelming and heavy, but now it had company, clarity. Daniel had known. That thought repeated itself in my mind as the car came to a stop in front of the office building. A modest brick structure, nothing impressive, but Daniel had trusted Mr. Hargrove for decades. If Daniel had left something behind, it would be here. We stepped inside together, though it didn't feel like we were together at all. The receptionist greeted us softly and led us into a conference room. The table was long, polished, and cold. I chose a seat near the end. Sophie sat beside me immediately. Across from us, Vanessa positioned herself at the head of the table without hesitation, as if she already owned everything we were about to discuss. Ethan sat next to her, his shoulders tense. Mr. Hargrove entered a moment later, carrying a folder. He looked older than I remembered, or perhaps the circumstances made him seem that way. Mrs. Bennet, he said gently, nodding to me. My deepest condolences. Thank you, I replied quietly. He sat down, placing the folder in front of him, and glanced around the room. His gaze lingered briefly on Vanessa, then moved on. Before we begin, he said, Daniel left very specific instructions. There is a letter that must be read aloud first. My heart tightened. He slid an envelope across the table toward me. My name was written on it in Daniel's handwriting. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Seeing his writing again, so familiar, so steady, felt like reopening a wound that had barely begun to close. Go on, Mom, Sophie whispered. I nodded slowly and opened the envelope. The paper inside was folded neatly. I unfolded it with trembling hands and began to read. My dearest Clara. My voice nearly failed me right there, but I forced myself to continue. If you're reading this, then I've said goodbye in person already. I hope I did it well enough, though I know no goodbye is ever enough after a lifetime together. I paused briefly, swallowing the lump in my throat. I want you to know first and foremost that you are the greatest part of my life. Not my work, not my accomplishments, not anything else.
You.
Always you. Tears blurred my vision, but I kept going. To my children, Ethan and Sophie, I love you both more than you may ever fully understand. But love doesn't mean blindness. And it doesn't mean silence. A faint shift in the room caught my attention, but I didn't look up. I have watched our family change over the years. Some of those changes were natural. Others were not. I have made decisions in my will that reflect not just love, but responsibility. Now I could feel Vanessa's eyes on me, sharp and impatient. These decisions are not made in anger. They are made with clarity. I ask that you respect them, even if you do not immediately understand them. I reached the final line. Clara, trust yourself. You've always seen the truth, even when others chose to ignore it. I lowered the paper slowly. The room was silent. Vanessa broke it first. Well, she said, exhaling sharply. That was dramatic. Sophie glared at her, but Mr. Hargrove cleared his throat before anything could escalate. Now, he said, opening the folder, we will proceed with a formal reading of the will. Vanessa leaned forward slightly, her posture suddenly alert. Ethan remained still, his expression unreadable. To my wife, Clara Bennett, Mr. Hargrove began, I leave our primary residence, located at 87 Willow Lane, fully paid, along with a monthly stipend sufficient to maintain her standard of living for the remainder of her life. I closed my eyes briefly. That was Daniel, always making sure only for its intended purposes, Mr. Hargrove replied evenly. I watched her carefully. This was the moment everything she had expected slipped out of her grasp. And the rest, she pressed. What about the rest of the estate? Mr. Hargrove turned a page. The remainder of Daniel Bennett's estate, including investments, savings, and insurance assets, will be transferred into a charitable foundation established in his name, dedicated to funding research for childhood neurological diseases. Sophie inhaled sharply. I felt my chest tighten. Daniel had never told me he had completed it. Vanessa stood abruptly. This is absurd, she said, her voice echoing in the room. This has to be manipulated. He wasn't in his right mind. Ethan finally spoke. Vanessa? No, she snapped, turning to him. This isn't fair. You're his son. You deserve more than this. I watched my son closely. His face was pale,
Confused.
but not angry, and that mattered. Mr. Hargrove folded his hands calmly. I should also mention, he added, that Daniel anticipated potential disputes. There is extensive documentation supporting his decisions, including detailed financial records of prior support provided to Ethan over the years. Vanessa froze. What does that mean? She asked slowly. It means, he said, that any legal challenge would bring those records into public view. Ethan's eyes widened slightly. He knew. The loans. The money. All of it. Vanessa sat down slowly, her confidence cracking for the first time. "This isn't over," she muttered. But her voice lacked the certainty it had before. The meeting ended shortly after that. Vanessa stormed out first. Ethan lingered for a moment, looking at me as if he wanted to say something, but didn't know how. Then he followed her. Sophie stayed by my side. As we gathered our things, Mr. Hargrove handed me a small envelope. "Daniel asked me to give you this privately," he said. My fingers trembled as I took it. Inside was a key, and a single line written in Daniel's hand. "For when you're ready to see everything clearly." I stared at it, my heart beginning to race. Because I knew Daniel, and if he said everything, then this wasn't over. Not even close. That night, the house felt heavier than it ever had before. Silence filled every corner, but it wasn't peaceful. It pressed in on me, thick and suffocating, like the walls themselves were holding on to everything that had happened. Sophie had insisted on staying over, and I was grateful for it. I wasn't ready to be alone with my thoughts just yet, not when those thoughts kept circling back to Daniel's letter and the key. It sat on the kitchen table now, small and unassuming, yet impossible to ignore. I must have looked at it 100 times, turning it over in my fingers, tracing its edges like it might somehow reveal its purpose if I stared long enough. Daniel had never been a man of unnecessary gestures. If he left me a key, it meant something important, something he hadn't been able to say out loud. "Mom, you should try to get some rest," Sophie said gently from the doorway. She had changed into one of her old t-shirts, the same one she used to wear as a teenager when she still lived here. Seeing her like that brought a strange comfort, like time had folded in on itself for just a moment. "I will," I replied, though we both knew it wasn't true. Her eyes drifted to the key. "You're thinking about it again." "I can't stop," I admitted. "Your father, he planned things. Always. Even the smallest details. And this isn't small." Sophie leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Then maybe you should open whatever it belongs to." I hesitated. "What if I'm not ready?" She gave a small, sad smile. "Mom, I don't think Dad would have given it to you if you weren't." After she went to bed, I stayed in the kitchen for a long time, the clock ticking loudly on the wall. Every second seemed to push me closer to a decision I couldn't avoid. Eventually, I stood, the chair scraping softly against the floor, and picked up the key. "If not now," I whispered to the empty room. "Then when?" The answer came quietly but firmly.
"Now."
I knew exactly where to go. Daniel's study had always been his space. Even after all these years, I rarely went through his things without him there. It wasn't that he kept secrets, it was simply respect. We had always given each other that. But now, that boundary no longer existed. I walked down the hallway slowly, my footsteps echoing faintly. The door to the study was slightly ajar, just as he had left it. I pushed it open, and the familiar scent of leather, paper, and his cologne greeted me like a memory brought to life. For a moment, I just stood there. His chair was still angled toward the desk, a book left open beside it. His glasses rested exactly where he had placed them last. It felt wrong, stepping into a space that still felt so much like him. "I'm sorry," I murmured, though I wasn't sure why. Then I moved toward the closet. Behind his suits, neatly arranged, untouched, was the small safe. I had seen it countless times over the years, but I had never once opened it. Daniel handled those things. Documents, finances, anything important. He always said it was easier that way. Now it was up to me. My hands trembled as I inserted the key into the lock. For a second, nothing happened. Then click. The sound echoed louder than it should have. I opened the safe slowly, almost expecting something dramatic to happen, though of course nothing did. Inside, there was no pile of cash, no jewelry, no obvious treasures. Just a single envelope. My name was written on it again. Clara. This time, There was no hesitation. I took it out and opened it immediately. Inside were documents. A lot of them. At first glance, they looked like ordinary financial papers. Bank statements, printed emails, transaction records. But as I began to read, my breath caught in my throat. These weren't ordinary. These were records. Detailed ones. Transfers from Ethan's accounts, large sums, moving into accounts that weren't in his name. Vanessa's name. I flipped to another page. Credit card statements. Expensive purchases, designer clothing, jewelry, luxury trips. All charged while she had been telling us they were struggling financially. My chest tightened.
No, y ho esperat.
There was more. Printouts of messages. Private conversations. I recognized Vanessa's tone immediately. Sharp, mocking, calculating. They're basically a safety net, one message read. Once his father passes, we'll be set. I just have to keep Ethan from questioning anything. My hands began to shake. Another message. He's too soft. He'll never stand up to me. And if he does, I'll just remind him what he stands to lose. I felt sick. This wasn't just manipulation. This was planning. Careful, deliberate planning. Then I found the final document. A letterhead from a law office. A consultation request. For divorce. Dated 3 months ago. 3 months. Before Daniel even passed. My knees gave out, and I sank into the chair behind me, the papers slipping slightly in my grip. She was going to leave him, I whispered, the realization hitting me all at once. After she got the money, Daniel had known. All of it. Every detail. And he had gathered proof. Not for himself.
For me.
For Ethan. I sat there for a long time, staring at the documents, trying to process everything. Anger rose slowly, mixing with grief until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. How long had this been happening? How long had Ethan been living inside this, without seeing it? And the harder question, how could I tell him? The sound of a floorboard creaking in the hallway startled me. I quickly gathered the papers back into the envelope just as Sophie appeared in the doorway, her expression concerned.
Mom?
Are you okay? I heard something. I looked up at her, unsure how to answer. I found what Dad left, I said quietly. She stepped closer. And I hesitated, then shook my head slightly. It's worse than I thought. Her face tightened. Vanessa? I nodded. Sophie exhaled sharply. I knew it. I always knew there was something off about her. This isn't just off, I said, my voice low. This is calculated. Sophie sat down across from me. What are you going to do? That question hung in the air. I looked down at the envelope in my hands. I don't know, I admitted. If I show this to Ethan, it will destroy him. And if you don't? She asked gently. I didn't answer. Because I already knew. The truth didn't disappear, just because it was hidden. And Ethan, he deserved to know, even if it broke him. The next morning came too quickly. I hadn't slept. The envelope sat on the table again, heavier now, not physically, but with everything it carried. I was pouring coffee when the doorbell rang. My heart skipped. I wasn't expecting anyone. For a brief moment, I considered ignoring it.
But something told me not to.
I walked to the door slowly and opened it. Ethan stood there, alone. He looked different, tired,
Pale.
like something inside him had started to crack. Mom, he said quietly. I stepped aside without a word. He walked in slowly, looking around the house like he hadn't been there in years. I didn't know where else to go, he admitted. And in that moment, I knew everything was about to change. Ethan stood in the middle of the living room like he didn't quite belong there anymore. It was strange, seeing my own son look like a guest in the house he had grown up in. His eyes moved slowly across the familiar space, the old bookshelf, the framed family photos, Daniel's chair by the window, as if he were trying to reconnect with something he had lost without realizing it. "I shouldn't have come this early," he said after a moment, his voice rough. I didn't sleep." "Neither did I replied quietly. That seemed to ease something in him, just a little. He nodded and sat down on the edge of the couch, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. His hands were clasped tightly together, just like mine had been at the funeral. "Vanessa and we had a fight," he said. I didn't interrupt. I knew better than to rush him. "A bad one," he added, exhaling slowly. "About the will. About you. About everything." I felt a familiar ache in my chest, but I stayed calm. "What did she say?" Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "What didn't she say?" He shook his head. "She wants me to contest the will. Says Dad wasn't in his right mind. Says you influenced him." There it was, the accusation I had expected. "And what do you think?" I asked gently. He hesitated. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice dropping. I didn't know about the foundation, or the trust being controlled like that. It just feels extreme." "Does it?" I asked, watching him carefully. He looked up at me, conflicted. "Doesn't it to you?" I held his gaze. "No," I said simply. That answer seemed to unsettle him more than anything else. "She said we need that money," he continued, running a hand through his hair. "We have debts. Investments that didn't work out. Things she told me would pay off eventually. Did they?" I asked. He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. This was the moment. The one Daniel had prepared me for. "Ethan," I said carefully, "how much do you really know about your finances?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" I said, choosing my words. "Do you see everything? Every account? Every transaction?" His expression shifted slightly. "Vanessa handles most of that. It's just easier."
Of course it was.
I stood up slowly and walked to the table, picking up the envelope Daniel had left me. It felt heavier than ever now. "Your father didn't leave this for me alone," I said, turning back to him. "He left it for you too." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. "What is it?" I hesitated for only a second. Then I handed it to him. "Read it." He took the envelope cautiously, as if he wasn't sure he wanted to know what was inside. For a moment, he just stared at it. Then he opened it. The room was silent except for the faint rustle of paper as he pulled out the documents. I watched his face as he began to read. At first, confusion. Then concentration. Then something else. His brow furrowed deeply as he flipped through the pages faster, his breathing becoming uneven. "What is this?" he asked under his breath. "Keep going," I said quietly.
He did.
And I saw the exact moment it hit him. His entire posture changed. The tension in his shoulders turned into something heavier, something like realization crashing down all at once. These transfers," he muttered. "Why are they going into her account?" He looked up at me, eyes wide. "Mom, did you know about this?" I shook my head slowly. "Not until last night." He swallowed hard and went back to the papers. The messages were next. I saw his hands begin to shake as he read them. His jaw tightened, his lips pressing into a thin line as each word sank in. "She wrote this," he whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He knew. He flipped to the final document. The consultation letter. I watched the color drain from his face. "Divorce?" he said, his voice barely audible. 3 months ago." The room felt unbearably still. "All this time," he murmured, staring at the page. "All this time, she was planning to leave me." He let out a hollow laugh that didn't sound like him at all. "I defended her," he said, looking up at me again. "I defended her to you. To Dad. I thought you were the ones trying to control me." My chest tightened, but I forced myself to stay steady. You weren't the first person to be fooled, I said gently. That doesn't make it better, he snapped suddenly, standing up. I chose her. Over and over again. I ignored everything. I ignored you. He began pacing the room, running both hands through his hair. I should have seen it. God, it was all right there, and He stopped abruptly, his voice breaking. I was blind. No, I said firmly, stepping toward him. You were manipulated. He shook his head. That's just an excuse. It's the truth, I replied. And your father knew it. That made him pause. He knew? Ethan asked, turning toward me. Yes, I said. He didn't tell you because he knew you wouldn't be ready to hear it. Not yet. Ethan looked down at the papers again, his expression shifting from anger to something deeper.
Pain.
I hurt him, he said quietly. Didn't I? I felt my throat tighten. He never stopped loving you, I said. Not for a second. Ethan closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of everything had finally settled on him. I don't know what to do, he admitted. And for the first time in years, he sounded like my son again. Not controlled, not distant, just lost. You start by telling the truth, I said. To yourself first. He nodded slowly. She gave me an ultimatum, he said after a moment. Before I came here, she said I have to choose. Between her and me. The words didn't need to be spoken out loud. And I asked quietly.
He looked at me.
Really looked at me. I didn't choose, he said. I left. A small, fragile hope stirred in my chest. She's not going to let this go, he added. She'll fight. She'll twist everything. She'll try to take Lucas away from me. I thought of the trust, of the documents, of everything Daniel had prepared. No, I said calmly. She won't. Ethan frowned. How can you be so sure? I walked back to the table and picked up the envelope again, holding it up slightly. Because your father didn't just see the truth, I said. He prepared for it. Ethan stared at me, something shifting in his eyes.
Hope.
Determination. Maybe even strength. For the first time since he walked through the door, he didn't look broken. He looked like someone who was beginning to wake up. The house felt different that morning. Not lighter, not yet, but clearer. Like a storm had passed through and left everything exposed, raw and undeniable. Ethan barely slept, I could tell. I heard him pacing during the night, the floor creaking under his weight just like it used to when he was a teenager worried about exams or life decisions. Only this time, the stakes were higher. This wasn't about grades or careers. This was about his entire life unraveling in front of him. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, untouched coffee growing cold between us. The envelope lay open again, its contents spread out like evidence in a courtroom. Because that's exactly what it was, evidence. Not just of betrayal, but of truth. And truth, I realized, was far more dangerous than lies when it finally surfaced. She's going to deny all of this, Ethan said, breaking the silence. His voice was steadier than yesterday, but there was something sharp underneath it now. Something new. She's going to say it's fake. Or taken out of context. She can try, I replied. But facts don't disappear just because someone doesn't like them. He nodded slowly, staring at the documents again. I keep replaying everything in my head, he admitted. All the times she pushed me away from you. From Dad. All the arguments she started right before family events. I thought it was just stress. Or misunderstandings. It wasn't, I said quietly. No, he agreed. It was control. The word hung between us. Control. That was what this had always been about. She wants me back, he added after a moment. She texted me all night. At first angry, then apologizing, then angry again. Saying she didn't mean it. Saying she was just upset. And, do you believe her?
I asked. He didn't hesitate this time. No.
That answer mattered more than anything else. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed again on the table. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening.
She's posting online, he said.
I felt a familiar heaviness settle in my chest. What now?
He turned the phone toward me.
A social media post. Long, dramatic. Vanessa's words. Painting herself as the victim. Claiming Ethan had abandoned her. Hinting that I had manipulated Daniel into changing his will. I read it silently. Each sentence more twisted than the last. She's trying to control the narrative, Ethan said. Yes, I replied. Because that's the only thing she has left. He picked up the phone again, staring at it for a long moment. I can't stay silent anymore, he said finally. I watched him carefully. This wasn't the same Ethan who used to avoid conflict at all costs. This was someone who had reached a limit. What are you going to do? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he started typing. Slowly at first. Then faster. More certain. I've let a lot of things go over the years, he said as he typed. Too many things. I told myself it was easier. That it wasn't worth the fight. And now? I asked.
He looked up at me.
Now it is. He finished typing and read it aloud before posting. I've stayed silent out of respect for my family, especially my father. But silence has allowed false narratives to spread. The truth is, I've been living in a situation I didn't fully understand until now. My parents were not controlling, they were trying to protect me, and I'm only now beginning to understand why. He paused, then added quietly, That's enough. And he hit post. The moment it went live, something shifted in the room. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. The first step. Within minutes, his phone began buzzing nonstop. Messages, notifications, calls. He ignored most of them, placing the phone face down on the table. I don't want to read any of it right now, he said. You don't have to, I replied. But then it buzzed again. And this time he looked. His expression hardened. She says she's taking Lucas, he said. My heart dropped. She's threatening to leave the state. Says I'll never see him again if I don't come back and fix this. There it was. The final move. Control through fear. I felt something inside me shift. Not fear, not panic, but resolve. No, I said firmly. Ethan looked at me, surprised by the certainty in my voice. She won't, I continued. How can you be so sure? He asked. I reached for the envelope again, pulling out the documents. Because your father didn't just gather this for no reason, I said. He knew exactly how far she would go. Ethan stared at the papers, then back at me. What are you saying? I'm saying, I replied, that this isn't just about exposing her. It's about protecting you. And Lucas. He leaned back slightly, processing. You think this is enough? He asked. I know it is, I said. With the right legal steps. The realization hit him slowly. You mean custody? I nodded. And everything else, I added. The financial manipulation, the intent, the deception. This changes everything. Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair again. But this time, it wasn't frantic. It was focused. I don't want Lucas growing up around that, he said quietly. I don't want him learning that this is what love looks like. My chest tightened, but this time with pride. That's exactly why your father did this, I said. Before he could respond, there was a loud knock at the door. We both froze. Another knock. Sharper this time. We didn't need to guess who it was. Ethan stood up slowly. I'll handle it, he said. But I shook my head. No, I said calmly. We will. We walked to the door together. I opened it. Vanessa stood there, perfectly composed on the surface, but her eyes gave her away. There was no softness left in them, no pretense of warmth, only anger. You've made a mistake, she said immediately, stepping forward slightly. No, Ethan replied before I could speak. I haven't. She blinked, clearly not expecting that. We need to talk, she said, her tone shifting. Privately. No, he repeated. We don't. Her gaze flicked to me, sharp and accusing. This is your doing, she said. You've turned him against me. I held her gaze steadily. No, I said. You did that yourself. For a moment, her mask slipped. Just a crack. But enough. You think you've won? She said quietly. This isn't over. Ethan stepped forward slightly. It is, he said. For me. She stared at him, searching his face for hesitation. There was none. And that was the moment everything changed, because for the first time, she realized she had lost control. A year changes more than people expect. Not all at once, not in some dramatic, cinematic way, but slowly, quietly, in the spaces between ordinary days. When I look back now, it's hard to believe how much has shifted since that morning when Ethan stood at my door, broken and uncertain, carrying the weight of truths he wasn't ready to face. And yet, here we are. The backyard is full of laughter. That's the first thing I notice as I stand by the kitchen window, watching through the soft glow of late afternoon sunlight. The grass is freshly cut, the old wooden table Daniel built decades ago now covered with plates, drinks, and a half-finished cake Sophie insisted on baking herself. Ethan is outside near the grill, focused in that familiar way he used to be when he was younger, determined to get everything just right. For a moment, just a moment, he looks exactly like his father. It doesn't hurt the same way anymore. That realization surprises me every time. The grief is still there, it always will be, but it has changed. It no longer consumes everything. It sits beside the good memories now instead of overshadowing them, like a quiet companion rather than a storm. Grandma, look. Lucas runs across the yard toward me, his small hands cupped carefully around something. His face is bright, excited, alive in a way that reminds me so much of the years when my own children were that young. What is it, sweetheart? I ask, stepping outside. He opens his hands slowly, revealing a tiny caterpillar. I found it near the fence.
Can we keep it?
Just until it turns into a butterfly. I smile. Crouching down beside, I turn to him, placing a hand on his arm. He didn't expect you to be perfect, I say. He just expected you to find your way. Ethan nods, looking out at the yard again. I almost didn't. But you did. I remind him. And that matters more than anything else. Later that evening, after dinner, after the laughter fades into quieter conversations and the sky begins to darken, I find myself sitting on the old porch swing Daniel built so many years ago. It creaks softly beneath me, the same familiar rhythm I've known for decades. The air is warm, calm, peaceful. Ethan joins me after a while, sitting down beside me without a word. We don't need many words anymore. Not like before. There's an understanding between us now that had been missing for too long. Do you think he knew? Ethan asks suddenly, looking up at the sky. Knew what? I ask. That it would all turn out like this, he says. That we'd find our way back. I think about that for a moment. About Daniel. About his quiet confidence, his careful planning, the way he always seemed to see things others missed. Yes, I say finally. I think he did. Ethan smiles faintly. Sounds like him. We sit in silence for a while after that, watching the stars begin to appear one by one. Somewhere inside the house, Lucas is laughing again, probably refusing to go to bed. Sophie's voice follows, trying to convince him otherwise. Life. Messy, imperfect, beautiful life. I used to think his last gift was the will, I say quietly. The way it stopped everything. The way it protected us. Ethan glances at me. And now? I look out at the yard, at the house, at the life we've rebuilt piece by piece. Now I think it was something else, I say. What? I smile, feeling a warmth spread through me that has nothing to do with the weather. He gave us a way back to each other. Ethan doesn't answer right away, but I see it in his expression. He understands. And as we sit there together, under a sky Daniel would have loved, I realize something that brings a quiet, steady comfort. He's gone, but what he built, what we built together, is still here, and it's stronger than ever.